Pokémon Platinum was a game that I cherished so remarkably growing up that I spent many an afternoon frantically consuming all information about it as I could. On the late 2000s internet, I learned of special Pokémon that could only be obtained through mystery gift events or the action replay. One of these Pokémon was the enigmatic Darkrai, a Pokémon wrapped in dark intrigue. Everything from the event itself to how he looked to using him in combat lulled my young mind further and further off the edge into the chasm of nightmares he occupied. There was nothing quite like him, a dark specter that lulls people into infinite sleep and torments their slumber with never-ending nightmares. I was so accustomed to Pokemon only acting with ill intent on their trainer's will, but here I was, facing down a Pokemon that tormented the young to such a terrible fate on its own accord. Most Pokemon aren't motivated to do much past survive when not caught by a trainer, so what did Darkrai seek to gain from cursing people in their sleep? I was forced to question how much autonomy and awareness he had, and by extension, how much Pokemon had as living creatures. When I managed to catch it in Platinum, his Pokédex description forced me to question his motives even further. To protect himself. It means no harm. So, we're only told that it uses its sleep-inducing powers to protect itself, which throws a wrench in our plans of understanding this creature. Today, I seek to find the answers that my younger self could not. I combed over just about every single piece of information about Darkrai that I could, from the old to the new, and the conclusions I've come to have kind of floored me. Games, films, and books have all revealed a trend of recurring elements, motifs, and symbolism with staggering familiarity and consistency that puts most mystical Pokemon to shame. Game Freak has hidden so many details about this one Pokemon that almost any other in the franchise, and I can prove it to you. What if I told you Darkrai is more in common with the Abrahamic Devil than any other Pokemon? The claim sounds preposterous, but I'm sure I can convince you when I explain myself, and explaining myself is something I plan on doing for a while. Just look at the runtime of the video for proof. This is a Pokemon shown with two different, conflicting ways of life shown to us with equal substance. The life of a hermit who seeks to be accepted, and an active tormentor who relishes his sadism. But neither of these descriptions give the whole picture of who Darkrai is, and why he does what he does. Here's how I'll format the video. I'm going to explain who Darkrai is based on primary sources, the games he's featured in, as well as pick a few of the most games he's had the most substantial appearances and roles in, as well as complementary materials like the movies and anime. At the end, I'll re-examine all the points I've made for a grand statement on Darkrai, his personality, his motives, etc. You're going to want to stick to the end with this one, because the end is where you'll find the grand statements I must make about this character. You won't understand anything unless you watch all of it, so watch it all, or he'll put you into a coma and you'll never wake up. I want this video to be a comprehensive understanding of who this Pokemon is and what he does, because with a shocking number of appearances, a discussion has to be held in earshot of the thousands, and I will be the one to hold it, like an Plato flexing my knowledge of strange games to the masses from my position of academia. My position comes with a master's in strange and obscure video knowledge, and I'm overly qualified to teach you, so why not sign up for my classes? All you need to do is click that little button to subscribe, and here. I've got more classes in the form of a whole playlist of videos just like these called Strange Gaming ready for you to enjoy. This is without doubt my most ambitious project. Okay, maybe my most second ambitious. But this is still an undertaking regardless. I humbly ask you to support me in my endeavor to cover strange and obscure games. If you don't, who's to say Darkrai won't pay you a visit and submerge you into eternal sleep if you don't do what I tell you to do? Now, let's get on with it, and let me take you into the confusing world of the pitch black Pokemon. Who is Darkrai? The question speaks for itself. Who is this Pokemon? The name alone tells us 1,000 words in one. The Rai suffix at the end of his name is just the Japanese name for dark, which means his name literally translates to dark, which is fitting. It tells us his typing, his classification of Pokemon, his affinity for fright and terror, and how he looks. He's also technically sexless, as most legendaries and mythical Pokemon tend to be, but come on. Most additional media has him as a male, so that's what we're rolling with. He's somewhere in the middle of a haunting, floating Brothers Grimm fable creature and Van Helsing, the red piece around his neck either resembling a cloak or jagged teeth depending on interpretation. The floating bits of smoke or clouds that make up his pitch-black body represent the undulating, hard-to-define shapes of his shadow behind you, which Darkrai can slip into with ease. The bone-white cap on his head resembles both a cap one would sleep in times of old and the color association with the moon, which explains much of his behavior and links him to Cresselia, whom both make up the ill-explained lunar duo. So we've got our key points from the primary source. We've got the sleeping and nightmare association and the moon/Cresselia association. The domain of nightmares is where Darkrai is most comfortable. Nearly all his depictions explain that he can cast someone to fall asleep and experience varying levels of nightmares, some of which seemingly have no end. This is backed up by two things: his signature moves and his ability. Dark Void was a dark-type move that had an 80% chance to hit and put opponents to sleep, combined with his ability, Bad Dreams, which deals chip damage to anyone sleeping while Darkrai is out. You can see how a very accurate sleeping move and an ability that deals free damage would be so devastating in battle. I described it in the past tense because Dark Void got big leagued hard by going down to 50% accuracy in Gen 7 onwards. No more Smeargle Dark Void, boys. The description of the attack is interesting too. It's always described the target as being dragged down into a type of shadow that puts them to sleep, like some kind of pocket dimension. The second thing that needs explaining is the moon association. Given his spooky nature, it's no surprise that he would be most active at night and in full moons. But this presents a problem because one of the only known ways to wake someone up from a Darkrai nightmare is with a lunar wing, something that falls from the Pokemon Cresselia, whose connection to the moon is obvious enough to not explain. The two Pokemon oppose each other greatly, one having gentle healing properties from the moon, and the other having threatening, malicious moon powers. The connection is understated, and we aren't given a full picture of what purpose these two play out in nature to justify balancing against one another, or if other moon-based Pokemon play a part in their lunar game, but I do have an example for you.
What the hell's wrong with you? Look like a Puerto Rican whore. Make me sick.
In Gen 4, during the post-game after you beat the champion, the sailor who normally takes you to Iron Island, Sailor Eldritch, not exactly a subtle name cues, son is stuck in an endless nightmare, moaning about how Darkrai is watching him. The only way to wake up his son is to visit Full Moon Island, which triggers Cresselia to becoming a roaming Pokemon, and she drops a lunar wing, which wakes the child. Curiously, there's another house in Canalave that can't be entered, but hold on to that for now. So Darkrai puts this child into an eternal nightmare, somehow. The child's mother does mention that it isn't unheard of for people in the city to fall into eternal slumbers. A port city connected to ancient islands and Pokemon associated with dreaming and the moon. If the sailor's name wasn't a clear enough clue, we found ourselves a neat little Lovecraft reference. This whole slice of the game has a bit of everything in it, from the Innsmouth to the Dreamlands. All that's missing is our player character discovering he has Pokemon blood and choosing to abandon his humanity and dive into the sea. The world of Pokemon doesn't know a lot about Darkrai or his methods, but they do know this. He's a mythical Pokemon, meaning that he can't traditionally be obtained in the wild like most Pokemon, or at least that's how he was introduced. The only way one can obtain him was through a mystery gift event where you can connect to the limited DS Wi-Fi to receive your special Pokemon. I think North Americans got it in 2008, and he had Dialga and Palkia's signature moves for some reason. But for Pokemon Platinum, there is another way. Between August and September of the same year, you could obtain something called the Members Card, which allowed you to open this building in Canalave City, after you do the whole Lunar Wing quest mentioned previously. The player character is sent to bed by a creepy old man and awakes on New Moon Island, just east of Full Moon Island. Inside the heart of darkness is Darkrai, waiting for you. Once you catch it, an interesting paragraph is spoken from presumably the old man inside is displayed. We're given a phenomenal insight. The nightmares Darkrai causes might not always be intentional. We know he can intentionally cause them, but the revelation of his apparent inability to always control them is something we must consider for his reputation. If his mere presence is enough to cause these endless coma-induced nightmares, then that would explain why the child fell under his domain. Full Moon Island, despite visiting there in a dream, is still in the Sinnoh region, and close enough to reach by boat travel from Canalave. Perhaps northern Snowpoint Town also falls victim to his nightmares. One must question why such a clause exists in such a mythical Pokemon. Legendaries and mythicals alike are typically the embodiments of their own domains. See the Gen 4 box legends. Dialga is time, Palkia is space, and Giratina is... what was he again? Some kind of like antimatter, or like dark matter? The explanation may arise when you consider that we still don't understand why the human brain dreams, so nightmares would fall under the same realm of not being fully understood, even to a being that embodies them. Perhaps there's another angle I've yet to explore. Darkrai, through his Member Pass event, embodies the ancient, unknowable darkness that dwells in ancient history and memories. Canalave is a microcosm of Sinnoh, a region where modern industrialization is just as important as preserving ancient history and customs. The Canalave Library is home to some truly ancient tomes that reveal history and folklore that forced players to question everything they knew about Pokemon. Darkrai is a living folklore, a shadowy being that never reveals itself or its motives. Though, there's one more revelation I think I should mention. If Darkrai cannot entirely control who is given nightmares, then how would that color his folklore and wives' tales? People speak of him in hushed tones out of fear and contempt, but if he doesn't always mean to afflict people with eternal sleep, should we pity him? Put yourself in his situation. Imagine your presence causing people to become comatose and tormented by sleep terrors beyond your control. Would the families and friends of those affected not loathe you for this, despite your intentions? It's no secret that he rests on an island, alone. Maybe luring your player character into catching him was more of a cry for help than a challenge. A Pokemon unable to interact with people or other Pokemon without causing them great fear, isolating itself from the rest of the world who shunned it. It's a bittersweet story that would rend anyone's soul to bits. This is how Pokemon Platinum interprets his character. We're given quite a list of traits and details that not a lot of other Pokemon are able to receive. We know that he can give people nightmares, intentionally or not. We know that he has a fair few connections to Eldritch Horror. He likes to operate in the nighttime when the moon is out, perhaps because that's when people are already sleeping, so he can either avoid them or give them nightmares. We have two sides to the same Pokemon. One is a malicious, malevolent entity who enjoys inflicting pain on children, and the other is a sympathetic, lonely Pokemon just as a slave to his own powers. These are all the details we have for his debut generation, however. There are a couple more games to draw information from, some mainline and some spin-offs. I'll be jumping around the timeline and not sticking to strict release dates in order to build intrigue. Trust me on this, it goes so much deeper than Platinum. Lentimos Town is a new location unique to Generation 5 sequel games, Pokemon Black and White 2. It's a dusty but cozy little town that should remind you of a quiet little suburb deep in Arizona or New Mexico. But there's a dark shadow hanging over top of the residence. To our east near Reversal Mountain is a decrepit house simply called the Strange House. A unique theme not found elsewhere in the game greets you once you're inside. The house is completely abandoned. Trainers like yourself looking for riches and information are its only inhabitants. Living inhabitants, that is. A ghostly figure of a young girl stalks the player, and each time she appears, she gives us new info on what happened to her, and subsequently the home. An everlasting dark dream. An endless stream of darkness. Dad. Mom. Abra. Where are you? Each encounter with this ghostly girl results in the furniture changing as we progress. This should begin to sound familiar. A child stuck in a nightmare, unable to wake up. Question is, how did she fall under Darkrai's spell? He seems to prefer the Sinnoh region, but perhaps with how remote Lentimos Town is, perhaps he thought it abandoned until he inadvertently caused this child to go under. In the dark dream, I heard my dad's voice. Forget about the lunar wing. Please stay here with us. The suffering she's experiencing is so great in this nightmare that she either dreamt her father's voice calling out for her, or even worse, heard him speaking to her. The lunar wing, as we know, can wake someone from eternal sleep, but why would her father tell her to forget about it, and what does "stay here with us" really mean? This could either be her dream dad beckoning her for the final true sleep of death, or perhaps even more morbidly, her dad putting her out of her misery. We're able to find the lunar wing inside the house, but it's too late to save her. Oh, the lunar wing. I can't take it now. But it'll be okay. Please return the wing to the Pokemon. I was waiting on the bridge so I can return it myself. The bridge she was referring to is Marvelous Bridge. In the original Black and White games, you could see the same figure appear on the bridge. If you bring the lunar wing to the bridge in Black and White 2, Cresselia will appear and give you a chance to catch her. All in all, what the hell was that story? We all thought it, but I don't think many were prepared to see what the real eternal sleep looks like. Death. You could be kept alive medically, but is it really humane to keep someone alive so that they may suffer more in their nightmares? The girl is resigned to her fate because she likely knows what's in store for her. There are bookshelves that talk about Darkrai, which mentions that giving people nightmares is still a defense mechanism. I admire how this child was able to move on to the afterlife and not hold a grudge against the Pokemon that caused her to die. I wonder what happened to her family. She had parents and a pet Abra. I suppose they either fled the house from fear, or they also died, if her father's voice is meant to imply that they were going to reach the afterlife together. It's a heartbreaking story, and it's bound to cause extreme reactions to Darkrai's nature. The strange house either amplified someone's pity for him, or made you really dislike him. I have good news for people who grew to hate him, because the next examples are pretty sinister. Yes, PokePark has a story, and yes, I am covering it seriously. Leave a like for that. Also, finding footage for this game is a total nightmare, so you're gonna just have to trust me when I tell you about certain things. As I understand it, there are two worlds in these games. There's PokePark, the setting for the first game, and Wish Park, the setting of this game. Pikachu and his life partner Piplup travel to Wish Park, but they become trapped there. Fast forwarding through the game, we get a chance to meet Queen Superior, who explains to them there's an old legend about something called the Dark Void, when both worlds try and merge together. Pikachu and Co. travel to different areas to free them of the more unsightly Pokemon to make sure the residents are content. There's a lot of mind control happening, and we find out it's being perpetrated by the entire Gothitelle line, but they're taking orders from Darkrai. Darkrai's plan is to merge the two worlds and cause them to both be completely destroyed in the process. Why does he do this? I'm not sure if I missed him explaining why, or if he's just doing it for the Nookie. I will have to leave a PokePark 2 expert to explain to me why in the comments section below. There are some genuine character moments and character building in this game, but Darkrai is mostly here to be the bad guy for the sake of having a villain to fight. But not before he pulls out some new tricks. He's been holding Pikachu's life partner Piplup hostage and somehow can completely remove other Pokemon's memories. I don't know how he obtained this ability, but he puts it to great effect by erasing Pikachu's new friend's memories of him and putting him into a nightmare coma, forcing him to live out a life where he has zero friends and he doesn't fit in. Vicious. We get this hilariously overdramatic cutscene of a depressed Pikachu. But not all is lost. Both worlds can stay alive if some bells are rung and someone flies into the Dark Void with this orb, and Darkrai, after you kick the snot out of him, sees the error of his ways and flies in. There's a whole quest afterwards of Pikachu and Co. contacting legendaries to see if they can bring him back, but we have some new facts to chew on. Darkrai can affect Pokemon's memories, manipulating them or erasing them outright. I suppose that being able to control someone's sleep hits enough of the brain to affect memories, but this is something I want you to hold on to. Secondly, this game shows us he has a real dark side to him, wanting to see everyone wiped out from reality out of sheer cruelty. We don't really understand his motives, but he has a genuine sadistic side to balance out his sympathetic. Our profile of him is becoming stronger. His isolation manifests itself in some sinister ways. And that only becomes truer as we look at the final game for this section, Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky. Trying to explain the entire story of a Mystery Dungeon game is a huge ask, and that's not really what I'm doing. I'm explaining things relevant to Darkrai, but there's still a lot to explain. Trying to summarize a JRPG plot is exhausting and will probably piss off fans of the game, and I'm using Sky instead of Time and Darkness because it's an enhanced version, so there for most convenience. The game starts with an unnamed player, you, turning into a Pokemon, having their memory become hazy after some kind of time travel incident. This is the least weird thing to happen to you. The very, very short explanation is someone broke the Temporal Tower, a domain belonging to Dialga which helps it manage the flow of time correctly. Once it broke, Dialga went sicko mode and began lashing out in a primordial form and won't listen to reason, which kickstarts the game's story. Another huge TLDR, you're able to fix the Temporal Tower and save Dialga, and he restores the timeline as thanks, but with a hefty cost. You, the player, must be disintegrated and die. The cost of winning is death and traumatizing your entire party. Actually, Dialga's chill and brings you back, so you're all good. We're still left with a pretty burning question, however. Who destroyed the Temporal Tower? The postgame answers some of these questions and elaborates on some of the more loose ends. While your participation in dungeon crawling with your main party and guild, you're getting recurring dreams from Cresselia, who claims that your existence is causing space to start distorting and warping because you're from a time that no longer exists. There is a way to solve this, however.
You should kill yourself now!
The party doesn't like that very much and does everything in its power to try and fix space, but Palkia himself intervenes because Cresselia has been whispering into his ear about killing you to set things straight. Palkia has been struggling to fight off his own nightmares, and you're sucked inside. Cresselia appears and eggs Palkia to finish you off, but another Cresselia appears and exposes the first one as a faker, as Darkrai. The final battle begins not far after, and Darkrai reveals his hand completely. He was the one who broke the Temporal Tower, which drove Dialga mad. He was the one tormenting Palkia, and you in your dreams about dying. He was the one behind your memory loss and your transformation to a Pokemon. Every detail of this game's story, the timeline problems, the near destruction of all time and all space, was solely from Darkrai. But why? Why would he cause so much chaos and destruction? What would motivate him to destroy the flow of time and space and warp it beyond recognition? He wants everyone to sleep. Every single Pokemon will be coated in darkness as time and space cease to function, essentially returning reality to a 0 point. Where the only contender for King of the Cosmos is Darkrai, who will rule what's left of the universe with an iron fist as he torments his helpless subjects with endless nightmares until they lose themselves in their own minds. I glossed over it when talking about Pokepark, but there's a very macabre aspect of Darkrai that we must speak about, his genocidal tendencies. This isn't just one example of Darkrai wanting to destroy the lives of everyone in a plane of existence, it's happened several times. Within him is a boundless well of malice and hatred for every living creature, and the desire to subjugate them under his rule, or by manipulating their memories, or by outright killing them. There have been genocidal Pokemon characters before. Cyrus from Gen 4 wanted to remake the world in his own image, which meant overriding everyone currently alive so he could shape it as he saw fit. But not on a scale to what Darkrai wants. Not only does he want to rule over everything, he also wants every living Pokemon and potentially human being on the planet to be trapped in a coma and suffer their own unique nightmares at his hand. Sorry, I thought I was playing Pokemon, not I have no mouth and I must scream. Luckily, we don't have to live in the future that Darkrai wants. You're able to beat him in a fight as he tries to flee through a portal, but Palkia comes in and puts his own 2 cents in by destroying that portal. This event somehow affects Darkrai's memory, meaning that he has no memory of what he tried to do to the world. You can even recruit him later on. So let's go over the new profile. Something I want to highlight is that other legendaries have a lot of beef with Darkrai. In Pokepark 2, the Weather Trio and the Twin Dragons all try and free him from the Dark Void, and there are a lot of legendaries he pisses off in Mystery Dungeon. Cresselia, as well as the embodiment of time and space, Dialga and Palkia. His memory-altering ability is also curious. Perhaps it was a connection with dreams, which implies some kind of scientific theories that dreams are linked to our memories a lot more than we understand. We need to talk about his genocidal tendencies. He acts very calculated and collected when he gets dialogue, but I simply cannot ignore the bottomless level of hatred he has to subject people to the horrible fate of being asleep forever and tortured with nightmares. What caused all that? We know that people are very apprehensive being around him because of his foul reputation, but clearly the reputation precedes him, because he is willing and able to subject the innocent to torture. There's something alien and unexplainable about why he feels this way. He's not exactly talkative when he wants to kill anyone. I feel a little uneasy about the scenario, even being trapped in a unique personal hell of my own mind's making, because an entity I've never met has so much loathing for all life that he wants to inflict the most deeply personal torment he can. The comparison to Harlan Ellison's story was a little more than a mere joke. Am, the computer god of a crumbled world torturing the last 5 remaining humans on planet Earth, shares this feeling quite a bit. The feeling of a semi-faceless monster that wants to harm living beings in their own personal ways. Humor me for a moment. I would like to end this segment with a famous quote from the original story that I think applies to Darkrai quite well. "Hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are 387.44 million miles of printed circuits in wafer-thin layers that fill my complex. If the word hate was engraved into each nanonangstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal 1/1,000,000,000th of the hate I feel for humans at this micro-instant for you. Hate! Hate!" You've likely noticed I keep trying to apply sympathetic motivations to Darkrai. Why is that? How can someone who wants to kill everyone possibly be sympathetic or relatable? The answer might surprise you because it's found in the 2007 movie The Rise of Darkrai. Based on the long-running Pokémon anime, the movie follows an encounter Ash has with Darkrai during whenever the Gen 4 anime arc was called. I remember watching this movie over and over again as a kid. I even had the Viz manga adaptation, which you'll mostly be seeing because I'm afraid of getting a strike for copyright by using too much footage from the movie. The movie is kind of a lot to take in at once. You know how I've been characterizing him so far as a genocidal, asocial maniac? I want you to keep reminding yourself of that while you watch this from the point on. Ash and Co make it to Alamos Town, a mountainside town inspired by Barcelona in Spain. This technically makes it the first place in the franchise inspired by Spain that I know of, and better yet, it doesn't run at 20 frames per second. The crew meets Alice, a young woman who works as a tour guide through the town. We approach upon a colossal tower quite aptly named the Space-Time Towers, which each side representing Dialga and Palkia. I hope warning bells are going off in your heads. Alice is quite skilled with leaf whistling. It calms Pokemon down whenever they're in a scuffle, which is shown repeatedly throughout the film, especially so in this garden. The garden is a very important location in the film, acting as a safe haven for all living creatures in the town. It was also the location where Alice's grandmother, Alicia, taught her how to use the grass whistle. It was built by the famous architect Gaudi, who also built the towers and likely most of the town. His great-grandson, Tonio, studies some of the odd happenings in town, particularly with some of the deformed objects that look clawed and gnarled. His scientific musings are cut short by the appearance of Darkrai, who manifests from the shadow, kind of like Giratina. Ash gets hit with Dark Void during the scuffle, and we finally get a representation of what a Darkrai nightmare looks like. It's pretty PG-13 in the movie, but nonetheless stressful for whatever Ash's age is. He's isolated and is getting frightening visions of Palkia, and Pikachu is being swallowed up in a sinkhole. Everyone is distraught that they were attacked, but Tonio rushes back to his lab to find Gaudi's diary, where he details how Alicia encountered Darkrai decades ago. He was fighting against other Pokemon in the garden, presumably because he gets along with nobody and nobody likes him. Alicia, however, doesn't react with fear or disdain. She pities the creature and comforts him with her leaf whistle. Come to think of it, have we ever seen someone not treat him with disdain? Every other interaction I've detailed, he's been antagonistic or trying to flee from an encounter. But this might be the earliest example of him not only choosing to be around someone not to gain something, but because he felt wanted. We also find that he can speak to humans, which is probably just a feature of the movie to tie into the themes a little bit tighter, but leaves us with an interesting question to pose. If Darkrai can speak, does he choose not to speak to most people?
Do not come here.
I never really thought about it, but if he had been shown some compassion, would we be able to understand him better? Perhaps this is just me, but I'm taking a look at the bigger picture at how this is all represented. A creature of darkness and malice being accepted into a garden by the comfort of a woman, while the garden's creator watches on. It might seem like I'm seeing parallels that aren't there, but this reminds me greatly of Paradise Lost by John Milton. Think about it. Darkrai representing Satan as he crawled into the serpent, the Pokemon Garden as the Garden of Eden, Alicia representing Eve, and Godi as God watching it all happen. Granted, it has a much happier ending than Paradise Lost, because Darkrai takes the comfort inwards and becomes indebted in affection to Alicia afterwards instead of causing her to doom mankind, but I think the comparison invites us to question Darkrai's role in the grand cosmology of the universe, perhaps as a rogue agent meant to test people. The gang travel up to the tower and find that the tower is actually a colossal musical instrument that plays music off of large discs inserted at the very top. Things don't stay good for very long, however. Some kind of purple lens flare appears in the sky, which causes Darkrai to flip out and shouting at whatever's inside to leave. Trainers in town are pretty sketched out and assume Darkrai is behind it, so they try and attack him, which leaves most Pokemon around stuck in nightmares as Darkrai defends himself. More spatial anomalies occur, which includes trapping the entire town in a Silent Hill-like dimension where fog surrounds all sides and prevents people from leaving, as well as making the Pokemon's dreams come to life, which usually involves them being chased by something horrifying, potentially Palkia if the purple outline in Ash's dream are any hints. Tonio is hesitant to blame Darkrai because he witnessed Darkrai saving Alice from falling from a great height when they were younger and interprets Darkrai's demand for people to leave the city as a warning for whatever creature transported the town away to leave instead. He's proven correct when it's revealed that Palkia is behind all of the spatial distortions and transporting the town as an effect of trying to hide from an angry Dialga chasing him. So, Darkrai was so moved by this child's comfort that he was willing to be shunned and hated by the rest of the townsfolk if it meant protecting what was now important to him, his newfound home. A home where he wasn't welcomed by all, but the fact he was welcomed at all was enough for him, and it's honestly pretty touching. We don't know where he came from this continuity, but if he carries over the motifs of him typically being feared and alone, having a place to not always be on guard must be intoxicating for those unfamiliar. Darkrai tries, and mostly fails to make Palkia flee, and things only escalate when Dialga comes in, which begins to tear at the fabric of space and erase the town from existence. He gets the sugar beaten out of him after fending Alice from a nasty blow and retreats to the gardens. He mistakenly calls Alice Alicia.
Alicia.
My name's Alice. You see, Alicia was my grandmother.
Alice.
Given their resemblance, it's not unreasonable, but also a little bittersweet that Darkrai didn't find anyone else who accepted him, and continually defended the only person who did, believing that her children were her, either because he was in some form of denial, or he's stupid. The only way to stop the two dragons from fighting is to play a tune called the Oración, which is Spanish for prayer, and is also the grass whistle song Alice's grandmother taught her all those years ago. So Alicia played a prayer to accept Darkrai into the garden, and now praying is the only way to stop the town from being swallowed by darkness. Huh. The gang finds the right disc to play in the tower and rush to the very top. Darkrai gets his ass beaten again and again, and we see an expanded version of the flashback he had. Alicia tells him he never has to leave, and that he can stay in the garden as long as he likes.
You don't have to leave. You can stay here.
Do you mean that?
Of course. You can stay here for as long as you like. This is everyone's garden.
His pupils dilate and he doesn't believe her. The words she imparts with him stay forever. This is everyone's garden. Those were the last words Darkrai spoke before stopping a final blow between the dragons and giving his life to protect the garden, to protect Alamos Town. He dies and fades into nothing. The gang are able to play the prayer disc, and Palkia restores the town back to normal after he and Dialga have been calmed. Take a look at how the prayer transforms the tower. Maybe I'm going schizo, but look at all those golden branches. Kind of looks like the back pieces of Arceus, no? The two dragons leave, and all is well, but the town is missing its dark defender. Someone whom they dearly misunderstood and treated shamefully, who gave his life to protect people that despised him. But not all is lost. He stands atop the space-time towers, returned to form. The movie ends with everyone thanking Darkrai for his noble efforts. What do we understand about Darkrai? You know how I was building a resume for him? Throw it out, because it seems to be almost a completely different character. From the convincing of one child, he was willing to give his life for this town and its inhabitants, which goes against every other portrayal of him we've seen this far. We're so close to our conclusion, so close to finally understanding the fragments of Darkrai's heart, and I'm going to talk all about it in our final segment. We have no more white meat turkeys. I'm gauging how many people have actually made it this far by saying this phrase. Comment down below, "We have no more white meat turkeys," to prove that you've watched up until this point. Only the realist ones have. All this time, I've theorized that there were two opposing sides to Darkrai, but I think I've been underestimating him the whole time. There aren't two sides, there's three. There's the one found in our primary games, the lonely spectre who can't control who receives nightmares, who isolates himself from the world to protect itself, and potentially out of fear and sorrow for though it inadvertently plagues. In Platinum, he might have accidentally cursed a child to be struck in his nightmare, which forced us to travel to Full Moon Island to retrieve a lunar wing from Cresselia to wake him. In Black and White 2, another child is victim to endless nightmares, but she wasn't lucky enough to be woken up, and she died, haunting her former home as a ghost. Pokédex entries and books found in these games all state that Darkrai does not typically inflict nightmares to harm people, but when it feels threatened, which might broadly apply to most people who approach it, intentionally or not. It might seem pedestrian when I've shown all of the other examples of what he can do, but being tormented by nightmares and unable to wake up is a really draining issue that I've become intimately familiar with. I've been getting a lot of sleep paralysis and terrible dreams lately, and it's been affecting my ability to lead a happy, fulfilling life. It's extremely stressful, makes me fear falling asleep. Imagine seeing the Hat Man as a 10-year-old and never able to wake up, an eternal sleep paralysis. But he doesn't mean to do that, apparently. This would characterize Darkrai as more of a dangerous animal than someone who can actively communicate with people. It operates as all Pokemon do, living on their own in the wild, or sharing the joys of being trained by a loyal trainer. But even when he resembles his fellow creatures the most, he's still separated an infinite distance away. He still has no place in the ecosystem. I don't think he really knows what purpose he serves, so he hides away from everyone, living on the run and drifting away from people, but still affecting them anyways. Speaking of being afflicted, what would a Darkrai nightmare actually look like? We've been given some examples, but entertain the thought for a moment and consider if you were personally affected by one of his nightmares. You are alone. Your family is gone, your friends are nowhere in sight. You might be able to recognize your location and some objects around you because your brain is trying to piece together random bits of information stored inside your head. The isolation is an important aspect, because we know that you're always alone in these dreams, but from a distance, you are being watched. Just a reminder, this dream doesn't end. Most nightmares end abruptly, but without a lunar wing, you are stuck. You're wandering through a realm of your own making, while your body wastes away as you become dehydrated and starve. It doesn't match all the symptoms of a coma because the victims are sometimes able to mutter something while stuck in their dreams, but still, the body being deprived of nourishment is something to seriously consider. Your dreams are bound to become much more sinister and tormenting as your fuel runs low and you begin to waste away. Your family watches you become a bag of bones before their very eyes. Darkrai can make you see whatever he wants you to see, depending on if he wants you to fall prey, that is. The Land of Sleep is his kingdom where he has total control. Whether he chooses to be merciful or cruel is entirely up to him. He may choose to re-emerge some of your most well-kept secrets or warn you about something in the near future. If someone could obtain a lunar wing, then you'll be okay. Physically, at least. Who knows how much of this you'll remember after you wake up, because if you don't write anything down, chances are you'll forget it. I'm someone who is regularly affected with all sorts of sleeping problems. I'm a terrible insomniac with a penchant for unnerving dreams that stick with me for too long. I don't think this is because a video game character is responsible, but if I had a name and a face to attach for all of my sorrow, I at least wish it could speak to me and answer my questions. Mainly, why are you doing this to me? He might not be able to speak in the main series, but that's a life that no one can envy. He's a mythical Pokemon too, and events from other games notwithstanding, is either one of very few like him or the last of his kind. He can't breed with anything else. So his life is doomed to end alone and unaccomplished. Is that something we should not pity? An animal deprived of any sense of family, companionship, of love? For solitude sometimes is best society. The second Darkrai is the conniving, evil, monstrous Darkrai found in the spin-off games. Both in Pokepark 2 and Mystery Dungeon, Darkrai loathes the world and his creatures so greatly that it seeks to wipe them out of reality, either by putting them all to sleep and controlling them through their dreams, or by erasing them from reality altogether. Comparably, Darkrai is much more social. He has minions and underlings, he understands the psyche of Pokemon well enough to manipulate them with their personal desires and gaslight them in their dreams. He's able to control his nightmares to not accidentally inflict them on anybody nearby. He can manipulate the memories of other creatures to sow his seeds of discord. This is the darkest we've ever seen of him. He demonstrates monstrous behavior to suit his monstrous desires. I've discussed his plans at length already, but I haven't begun to question his motives for why he's doing all this. If we use the base game as an example, is he simply tired of being treated like a threat and he's acting out? Well, stick with me on this one. Darkrai's purpose on Earth might be that of a tempter, someone who deliberately causes problems to test the temptations and constitution of other Pokemon. It might sound strange, but consider that he likes to mess with regular, non-story relevant Pokemon, and grand legendaries in charge of the concepts of time and space without a second thought. I don't have a lot of evidence to back this up, but it would provide an explanation why he would be doing all this. It makes his fate perhaps even crueler, that he is divinely ordained to be loathed by everyone, to be the platonic bad guy and obstacle for everyone's character development, like the accuser in the Book of Job who tempts the dutiful man to renounce God. For this metaphor to make sense, God would have to be something like friendship between you and your friends, which does make a little bit of sense because he does like to split up your group a lot. Darkrai as an agent of chaos is something interesting to chew on, but his actions speak louder than his few words. He saw the error of his ways in Pokepark 2 and gave his life to stop from destroying both worlds, so clearly he has his own feelings on the situation sometimes. He clearly enjoys hurting others greatly, but he might be unsure of following entirely through with his plans. It reminds me a great deal of Thanos having infinite power in Marvel Comics on several occasions, but always finding a way to lose it and be thwarted because he self-consciously prepares himself to lose because he doesn't entirely feel worthy of the power. Maybe I'm looking too deeply into all of this. Curiously, Darkrai loses his memories at the end of Explorers of Sky and doesn't recall what he did, which might actually explain how he appears in the mainline games. Hold on to this tidbit. Did I request thee, Maker, from my clay, to mold me, man? Did I solicit thee from darkness to promote me? Finally, we have how he's portrayed in the anime. We've had lonely Darkrai, we've had evil Darkrai, but here we have heroic, anti-hero Darkrai. He came from an unknown scuffle and sowed conflict with other Pokemon, but upon being shown compassion, he repays his affection in this form of protection. Darkrai becomes a deity focused on protecting the person who showed him compassion in the garden he calls home. He's able to communicate with humans in this continuity. Not well, mind you, not past a couple sentences, which mean he's either not very well versed in conversation or he's on the spectrum. Darkrai doesn't like people very much, or at least struggles to show it past a select bloodline, but for those he does openly dote on, he protects them from any harm, regardless of the damage it does to him. I'm going to start putting the pieces together. I made parallels to Darkrai being a kind of devil-like figure, and with the Abrahamic symbolism featured in the movie, I think that might be a powerful cudgel to break down his character. Think about it like this. The devil flees to the Garden of Eden, meets someone who shows him compassion, and is allowed to redeem himself in a way by sacrificing his life to protect what God has created. It might not be accurate to how Satan operates in reality, but in the realm of fantasy that Pokemon operates in, it's a touching story, but there are still some unanswered questions. Why is Darkrai suddenly accepting of people now? I guess we never really got to see the scenarios in the game, but what was so different with how Alice's grandmother treated him? Was it the prayer she played on the grass whistle? I want everyone to brace themselves to this because I've got a homebrew explanation for everything. I won't claim this is what Game Freak intended because it obviously wasn't. This Pokemon is split by whoever is writing him at the moment, but entertain this thought experiment for me. A Pokemon created to be a disturber, to use nightmares and temptation to test people, and the necessary, required evil being to make sure the good-hearted stay good-hearted and build their bonds together. This means that Darkrai was not meant to have friends, to be loved or understood, but to be loathed and fought against. He is the platonic villain to pervert and subvert the natural conditions required to be alive. He is the bridge between sleep and death. Perhaps on orders from the heavens, or acting on his own, he tries to kill an uncountable numbers of living beings and manipulate them into destroying reality, which is never fated to work because he was not made to succeed. He is a stepping stone. This leads into Explorers of Sky, where Palkia corrupts his memory and he forgets who he really is and what his purpose is. Through forgetting, he's also partially lost control of his powers, which means he accidentally puts people to sleep. He may have forgotten, but the people haven't forgotten about him. They hate him for reasons he doesn't remember or understand, so he isolates himself from every living being, scorned and running away from a world that wants him dead. No compassion or love comes his way until he meets a young girl inside this garden, who doesn't know who he is and doesn't care. Just from their first meeting, she gives him something to work towards: home, love. He indebts his life to her and her family, protecting the garden and Alamos Town, because he's found a new purpose in life, and that is to be the Dark Defender. And it's something he gives his life towards. He's okay with his eventual death because it meant he was able to forge his own path and make a difference through his own decisions, something he was not created to do. With this, he can die satisfied, but he's been granted a second chance at life. Something from the heavens was pleased with his actions and brought him back to continue his newfound purpose, one he was able to forge for himself. I sung of chaos and eternal night, taught by heavenly muse to venture down to the dark descent, and up to reascend. This is how I interpret Darkrai's story, as a being created to be the devil, who is able to find redemption through mankind's compassion and dedicates his life to protecting them in his own way. We may never get an actual answer from the developers, because this is just me creating a loosely tied story from different media pieces, but it's as good as any because Pokemon is a franchise flexible enough to have your own input without overriding too much. There aren't many characters that make me think like this, and I don't think a lot of other people would come to the conclusions I did. This is maybe because I'm reaching, or perhaps there truly might be a deeper narrative with Darkrai going on. It's hard to tell unless you make the first step, and I think I've found an explanation I'm satisfied with. This is a Pokemon with oodles of hidden details and facts to stitch together, and I encourage people to look beyond the main series to find the deepest lore. And speaking of deepest lore, what does Darkrai do after coming back to life? Compete in Pokémon Tournament, of course! Surely he's a playable character for a reason, no? I would be delighted to see how people in the comments section down below come up with their own theories and tell me how they feel about the pitch black Pokemon. For me, this has been building to something I've wanted to talk about for a very, very long time. Darkrai is a Pokemon I have quite a connection with, which I think is not a coincidence because of what kind of life I had. As a young child with frequent sleep problems, it only makes sense that I'd be drawn to someone who known to torment children. But perhaps inadvertently, I took a few lessons from Alicia, and that I was able to forgive this kind of dark tormentor from doing this to me. Obviously he isn't real, but the emotional through line I have with this thing exists as a tangible thing I can speak about, and it possessed me as I wrote every word for this script, and I'm overjoyed to have produced something for it and have something to show. Strange Gaming is taking a new direction, and each episodes are being more edited, larger, and overall simply better, and I can't do that without your support. There's a whole playlist to check out of different games and content, and it's all good, I promise. Sleep is something I've always had a strange relationship with. Some of my favorite videos of all time, say the Yume Nikki video, also tackles the topics of sleeping and nightmares. Perhaps there's a connection between the two, of being forcibly trapped in nightmare. Granted, Madotsuki can wake up, so it's not a huge, she's not exactly stuck in the dream, but I think it's interesting that media I'm inadvertently drawn to typically features sleep as a main component, sleeping, dreaming, and what the interpretations of those mean. Before I go, I do have a little teaser for something I'm working on. Until then, have a lovely rest of your day.